Okay, are we all back here? Second paper for today, avoiding the south side and the suburbs, the geography of mobile crowdsourcing markets. Notice that the authors here, and they use, these authors here use the other paper that we just discussed, the Theodoros paper, as one of its references, but it now talks about mobile crowdsourcing markets and not about on-demand mobile workforce. They're talking about the same thing, in fact, but in fact even assessing and analyzing the same, at least one of the same platforms, but they already have a different name for the thing, right? And what they call mobile crowdsourcing markets here, fortunately the definition is about the same as for the previous paper. Mobile crowdsourcing markets are the geographic counterparts to virtual crowdsourcing markets, right? So they again claim that platforms, marketplaces like Amazon, the Amazon Turk. By the way, do you know why they call it Amazon Turk? Because there was in the past this allegedly this Turkman, very short, that they put inside a, let's say a, what do you call it? It was almost pretend that he was a robot, and he played chess, and he won many games against people. But they were saying that this was, of course, in a time that in which automation was still not around, and robots were definitely only a dream. But they pretended that this mechanical this Turk was a robot, when in fact it was a person inside a lot of iron and then so this is where Amazon got this nickname for this enterprise, for this project, Mechanical Turk, because it is now a technology that resembles a mechanical way of doing things, but it's actually humans doing it. Okay. Okay. Anyway, well, of course, start with the abstract. Do we have an objective clearly stated for this paper? Let me see here. What is the objective? It's probably. Pardon?
I think that it's not clearly stated.
It's again. I usually say, why not write the objective in a very precise way? The objective of this paper is. You know why we have to do that? We have to be really bureaucratic in that sense. Because our papers will be reviewed when we submit an academic paper to a conference or to a journal. It will be reviewed in a what we call a double-blind review. Double-blind review, not because it's two people reviewing. Many times it's two people, right? But it's actually because it's double-blind because the person who's assessing your work doesn't know who you are, and you don't know who they are. So it's blind in both ways, right? But anyway, it's a double-blind review, usually performed by 2 or 3 reviewers that will have to say if your paper is good or not, and they have to fill in a form. And one of the questions in the form is the objective clearly stated? Or if they ask if the objective clearly stated, it means that it should be clearly written, but which is unfair. In fact, I don't think that you should necessarily have your objective clearly stated. You should have an objective that is, whoever reads clearly understands what the objective is. But from there, from an objective that can be clearly understood to is the objective clearly stated, we've already, it's a big jump, and it's a jump that allows the bureaucratic reviewer to look for the word objective, first of all. Look in the paper. Well, the word objective doesn't appear. Well, and then he looks, Then he reads the paper already with that impression. There is no objective. But then the objective appears like here or like in many other papers where you say, well, they say what the authors say what they do, but what is what they do, what they wanted with the paper? It's different things, right? What they do is concerned with the results that will be obtained, but what were the intentions? What were the reasons to perform this effort? So again, theoretically, the objective didn't need to be clearly stated, but it should be clear. You should read a paper and know what the author wanted with the paper.
And sometimes in the first round, the reviewers check.
Yeah, because they usually have let's say a form that they have to tick and say, is the objective clearly stated? If it's not, they're going to say no. And then after they've said no, or if sometimes they have a Likert scale, say if you agree, and then they say no, the objective is not clearly stated. There is this other issue and this other issue and this other issue, and then at the end, do you recommend this paper to be accepted or rejected? Of course, there's a lot of no's already, or a lot of low grades, and it was just a matter of, I understand that I'm being very bureaucratic here, but we have to think, as I've already said before, we have to think of our academic papers as reports. We're not doing literature here. It's a report. You're reporting results. And if you're reporting results, you want this to be as clear as possible for whoever is reading, even if it's a stupid blind reviewer, right? Who's concerned of getting rid of your paper as soon as he or she can, because we're all overloaded with work anyway, right? So if they can't say that it's bad and tell that there's a lot of things to be performed before your paper can be published, that's an easy way out, right? Because then they don't have to concern in making suggestions about improvements, which is much more, notice, being effective is much more difficult than being efficient. They're just being efficient and say, no objectives, no. They're not thinking, well, let me read this and understand what the objective is, and then maybe even write back to the author and says, was this, just want to make sure that this is your objective, because if this is your objective, yes, you have accomplished it, right? But if your objective was something else, maybe you should state and, anyway. But I agree here with Marco, it's not clearly stated, but they say at least that they aim, where is it? They aim at addressing two key questions. These two key research questions give us an idea of what the objective was. What geographic factors influence whether a crowd worker will be willing to do a task? And what geographic factors influence how much compensation a crowd worker will demand in order to do a task? So the objective is answering those two questions. Okay. Is there any hint about the method that is going to be used to answer those questions?
Only quantitative and qualitative analysis.
Yeah, it's they don't say much, but they are concerned in explaining that at least they will be using qualitative and quantitative analysis. Actually, first quantitative modeling to show that the travel distance to the location of the task, to try and figure out if this travel distance to the location of the task and the socio-economic status of the task are important factors or not for the decision of taking the task or not. Okay, so this is the methodology, and then they say here that maybe some of the results they have may also be interesting to something they consider to be a different thing here, that they call as sharing economy. Sharing economy, at least as they refer it to here, is something like Uber, right? Sharing economy. I share resources with other people. we were working, Fernando Viana, one of the students from last year, and Professor Jurandir Peinado and I were working with trying to understand the motivations of people to evaluate drivers for the Uber platform and also for Cabify, right? Notice motivation is always, as I said, we'll be researching that for quite a while. We were finding it difficult to classify Uber and say what it was. And of course then Fernando remembered this paper here and said, let's talk about sharing economy, right? But I said, although I understand that Uber very flexibly could be taken as a part of a sharing economy, because after all, it may be some other user, just like me, user of transportation in the city, sharing their resource, the automobile. I think that, at least for me, Uber is much more like micro-tasking again, you know, getting someone to perform a collective intelligence task for money, right? Then actually sharing economy. A sharing economy for me would, and I think that there is a lot of opportunities for us to study sharing economy from the perspective of collective intelligence, but I would think of something more like a cooperative. For example, you have a tractor, and and many farmers share the ownership of that tractor, or at least share the work of it. It has been used this way, you know, like many authors are refer to Uber as part of sharing economy. We were thinking if we were to use that term, and I think in fact I don't even remember what our final decision was, but I don't even remember what I ate for lunch yesterday. So, but I remember that we were discussing a lot, and I said, look, you know, I would like sharing economy to mean something different than someone working basically as a taxi driver, but not on a contract, not on a salary, or not on a monthly, not as, maybe with a little more control on his own agenda, on his own schedule, let's say, but still, you know, just renting his car and selling the service of driving you around. I think it's, you know, but again, terms that we still need to develop and develop an agreement of how we're going to be using them, use them in the future. Carlos, were you going to say something, or no?
Just thinking about Uber, it's different. Service.
Yeah, I think at least the way maybe the way it was originally conceived. I don't know how much it changed from the beginning. I think of Uber as a service and someone providing a service. It could be, and I think Uber may eventually in the future become shared economy when instead of paying for the rides, we do something different. They would have to change the model. It would, and it would probably not be Uber, because Uber has an owner who's actually the owner of a huge fleet of taxis that are each one of them self-employed, let's say, right? But I would see something working exactly like Uber, more like a swarm intelligence. I think where we say, look, we all have cars, or in fact we don't need to all have cars. Maybe we could even you know, share cars, buy cars together, or even not buy a car from Volkswagen, just lease it from Volkswagen. Volkswagen would become and that car would become something that would be used by several people. Coordinating the use of many people of the same resource would be more like, for me, would be a better use of the expression shared economy, right? I don't, you know, with Uber, what happens is that the person doesn't say, oh yes, sure, let's share the car. You get the car now and go wherever you want, and then someone else will get it from there. That would be more, for me, it would be a preciser, at least an easier way for me to think of the term shared economy.
When
But
I was researching about carpooling
Mhm.
and ride sharing, it's like when people
They use the term ride sharing. Yes.
There were some authors that used carpooling for Uber,
Uh-huh.
and I was like
Yeah.
asking the same questions you did. Why?
Yeah, carpooling, I don't know if you're all familiar with this term, but carpooling actually means, well, it means share. It would be related to sharing economy, but in many cases, the carpool is just a regulation that some states, for example, in the United States have, that, well, if you have two people in the car, you can drive this lane. Otherwise, if you're not carpooling, if you're not taking someone with you, you have to be in the congested lines, right? And then you know, it's carpooling may be a result of sharing, and may even stimulate sharing, because you may, in fact, there are even places where people say, okay, so if I can take an express line, if there are more people in the car, I'm happy to give a lift, to give a ride to someone, just so that I have someone else there. And then people will even agree. There are places where this happens. People will agree on a bus stop or a place where if there's someone there, I will give them a ride because I know that they're going the same way, and I'll be able to carpool, right? That will prevent me from having, let's say, just a doll pretending to be a human next to me so that the camera thinks that it's a human there. I remember that I once saw on TV this guy that the police had just caught driving a car with an inflated doll, just so that he could use the carpooling system. But anyway, yeah, the other term that they use there is ride sharing, right? Which again, we also thought of ride sharing. They use ride sharing a lot for Uber, but is it ride sharing? You know, are we just sharing? No, it's a service that is. Yeah, it's a service. It's just another way of organizing a taxi service, where, you know, with taxis many times that also happened, that the taxi was the owner of the taxi, but in the taxis were pretty much like Uber already to a large extent, considering that they had those. Again, it's a cooperative system where, you know, you phoned a taxi line, and then they would send you a taxi. Not very different to Uber, in fact. It's just that Uber uses informal taxi drivers. It's starting to be regulated here and there, so it will become each time more closer to a taxi service with a good information system behind to make it more efficient, and therefore maybe making it cheaper, not only because it's microtasking, not only because it's using drivers that cannot even calculate how much it costs for them to drive around. And I'm sure that many of the people who are driving around as Uber drivers now do not really realize how much they're spending or how much they will have to spend on tires replacement and, well, even insurance, and they don't take all of that into account. So at the beginning, it was so amateur that prices could be really low because people thought that they were always that they were having a profit. Now, well, the other day I was calling an Uber here at UTFPR. When I saw the price, I said, no, I'm going to take a taxi. It was cheaper. It was, of course, it was one of those times. How do they call the time when it's more expensive because they have a name for that. Anyway, dynamic fare. It was so the dynamic fare was really dynamic, you know, dynamic and high. And I said, no, I'm going to take a taxi. It was half the price to take the taxi home than taking Uber at that dynamic fare. Right? But anyway. That all to say that, again, our terms are not precisely defined. It's good any one of you who decides to do any work to try and systematize, to organize this taxonomy, to try and, let's say, put some order to the chaos of the language that we use in collective intelligence. Text will probably be doing a good job for the community, right? Trying to see what each author is saying when he or she uses a specific expression, and showing that we are all using different expressions.
And some expressions could be grouped.
They could and should and will be grouped together, some of them.
Some could
I'm not sure if they will be grouped under the most logic expression, because some of them appeared before and then others start using. For example, think of using mobile workforce for a workforce that is performing physical tasks. Nah? As I said, I would prefer physical tasks workforce or something. For me, it would be much clearer. But after 5 or 6 authors have used a term, it starts becoming the correct term, and then we may not have a possibility of changing afterwards. But there's still a lot to be done there. Okay. Well, in the introduction here, they contextualize their work, and then they even talk a little bit about the results they will get to. I find this usually a little strange to talk about the results in the introduction already, because it's almost like telling the end of the movie at the beginning. So it looks a little in reverse. But I see that in many areas people like to do that. And in fact, there is nothing necessarily too bad about it. But they already say here that when they when they were researching TaskRabbit, they noticed that areas with low socioeconomic status, like the south side of Chicago, and suburban and rural areas, are areas that are disadvantaged with respect to this kind of services. In fact, the authors claim here that the life of the poor is more expensive, at least with respect to these things. They do not have access to these tasks at the same reasonable prices that people would get in other areas where are more people offering such services. Right?
This has advantages.
There
is advantages for the advantage.
Yeah, and disadvantages for the disadvantaged. Yeah, so there is a social issue here to be. It's expensive to be poor. Exactly. That's what I was. That was the expression that I was trying to recall here. It's expensive to be poor, and then, of course, they show why they get to this conclusion. In this paper, they talk about volunteered information. Right. This is an expression that I think this is sort of easy to understand what volunteered information means. This turning the volunteer into a verb, right? And information that is provided freely, right? And by people that are aware that they are providing that information, right? I just wanted to make sure that you understand that volunteered information is not necessarily the same as contributed information. Those are two terms that will appear often, and I think in this case, volunteered information is a good term, because it allows us also to think that there is information, collective intelligence information, that is collected without, at least without or not necessarily in a way that it was voluntarily provided, right? It could still be contributed, right? The information got to whoever is going to use it, but not.
You're saying that sometimes we are not aware.
It could be we're not aware, and sometimes we are aware, but it was not volunteer, right? For example, when we write something on a social network that we intended to write to our friends, we're writing to anyone who checks our posting, right? Or who, and in fact, our posting is being sent to friends of friends. I don't know what the algorithm's logic is, but it will definitely reach other people than those that you intended. You know that this information is open in the sense it's not provided only to your friends. You know that. You're not voluntarily sharing this information with the rest of the world. So it was not your intention. If you could, maybe you would even say, no, I only want not my Facebook friends to see this. I would only want my really best friends to see it, or I would only want these people to see it. If you had the opportunity, maybe you would select differently. You can to some extent. You can, but you can't. I mean, you can at a level that is inefficient, and so nobody's going to do it. It's part of the logic of social networks, these commercial social networks that we see, that your information is kept more open than you will most of the times, because this is related to their business and not to your willing, right? Just to make this difference, volunteered information is different to contributed information. Contributed information you may be aware of, or you may not be aware of. Sometimes. Okay. One thing that they show right here on the first page already is that by using their statistics, they show that not only distance to the task, but also the socioeconomic situation socioeconomic status aqui influence the willingness of a user accepting taking a task. Which is, let's say, it was already something that we could expect, right? If a task is far from where you are, it will be less interesting to you. Say, Carmen.
For example, in my house, Uber doesn't come.
Where do you live?
Near the...
You don't live, you hide.
No, next to the Thebault Park.
Uh-huh.
But it's a closed door, closed street.
Uh-huh, okay.
So for safety, they don't...
Oh, I see. Uh-huh. For safety? Gee.
Because
Is your suburb like the south side of Chicago?
No, but they don't come.
Uh-huh. Interesting. So if you want to take Uber, you have to walk out and then you expose yourself to an unsafer situation too.
I heard about that. I think they are mapping some areas reported by the drivers that they were assaulted or something.
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, maybe because this is easy for them, and it's based on collective intelligence. They map places where drivers report that they were mugged or they had problems, right? So I think you live in the south side. You better get concerned of of where you live, or maybe their system is mistaken.
Yeah.
I think
There's a glitch.
Yeah, I think the system checks if it's a closed street, they don't want to go.
But I would expect a street, you mean a street that there's only one way out, right? But I would expect a street like that to be safer for Uber than any other. I don't know. It seems to be a safer environment, but maybe it's just a glitch in their software. The only problem with these systems is that it may be just a glitch, but there's nothing you can do. You just have to say, okay, I either move or I have to walk a block to.
Take a line.
They do go there. Okay, so it's good to have competition.
And Cabify as well.
Okay. It's one interesting thing that they observed here is that very few people responded their survey who lived in the low socioeconomic status areas. Do you think that means that these people who live in those areas don't like answering surveys? Would that be the cause? No, probably there are less people in those areas who are actually performing those tasks. Why so? Well, depending. In this case, remember, this is what is it? TaskRabbit? TaskRabbit, right? Yeah. This is TaskRabbit. Remember, TaskRabbit asks a lot of questions, and they have a few requirements. The same way, at the end, they're going to say that there are implications for the ride-sharing companies as well, because they say, well, for Uber is also something that is not anyone who will be performing Uber tasks, because it depends on not having a car, but having access to a car, having a driver's license, having insurance or whatever, and all those things start putting barriers to people that can't afford those things. Here there's an interesting thing about gender and related to these markets. Women are far more, where is that? Women, here. Women are far more likely than men to avoid doing a task, primarily for safety and distance reasons. So those two reasons make women less interested in performing a task than men. And then here, a larger pool of women are likely competing for a smaller pool of tasks. So here, they're not only pointing out to some unfairness with respect to the socioeconomically those social economic those who live in a socioeconomic areas that are not so privileged, but also they're saying women compete against women more often for fewer available tasks, because they refuse to take other tasks for considering them riskier or whatever, for whatever other reason not suitable. Here they start talking about the motivations. They found that, and here still talking about the other paper there, the one written by Teodoro et al. That we discussed before. They say that monetary compensations and control of work conditions, time of day, rate of pay, the tasks they do, were the primary factors for joining these systems. So this is motivations that they saw happening already in the literature, and that people would do things, as stated here, at a time that is convenient to them. They will perform these tasks that depend on geography, based on geography. So they will do things that they can do in their neighborhoods, and they also prefer very simple, very easy tasks. Okay, so this is all what they say here. Remember that the other paper, Teodoro et al., talk about, I don't even remember how they call the power users. There it was super agents. Here they appear as power users, right? And notice these guys here, red, they refer to the other paper. So they are already saying, well, we don't like the term that they use there. We want to coin our own, right? And then we here have to start making sense of what is the difference between, what is that? Super agents and power users. Basically, for what the authors of both papers say, it's users that contribute to the platform much more often than most others. So Pareto rules, right? Pareto also rules here, and we should have that into account when deciding to motivate, because many times it's easier to just focus our efforts into motivating these people that are more easily motivatable, right? And forgetting the rest, right? It may be more economically interesting for to do that, except in the case where we're doing work that involves building citizenship, because citizenship is something that we don't want to build only on the 20% that are probably already the ones that are more.
But sometimes if you start working with super agents, they can,
Involve others. They may turn others into super agents as well. Okay, that could be a thing. Yeah, it's for us for now. It's just interesting that not everyone is going to respond the same way to our call for support. Here in this research, this part of the paper here is where the authors start talking more about the methodology they use. They say here, we first formalize the decision-making of crowd workers as consisting of two sequential steps: willingness to do the task and how much compensation they require for the task, the price of the task. So they say first people decide, well, this is something that I'd be able to do, I would like to do, and then what would be my price for that. Then after they did that, they say we controlled, we do a controlled study of crowd workers from one of the most popular places for mobile crowd work, TaskRabbit. We use formal statistical modeling to quantify the effect of distance to task and socioeconomic status of the task area on workers' decision regarding willingness and compensation. We enrich the results of our formal model through qualitative analysis that reveals the reasons behind workers' decisions. Qualitative analysis is, in this case, considering that they started with statistics to build their models, is a way of maybe providing what we call triangulation, right? It's providing a softer way of understanding something that the hard numbers had already shown. And it's usually something interesting for us to do in our research, to use more than one method, because then we use one method to understand or to find some result, and then when we use other methods to make us understand it a little better, understand in detail, and even check if there is no crashing between information or between the analysis done by different methods, because sometimes that happens, and of course when that happens, the validity of your results is questionable. So the research questions for the paper, first of them are related to willingness. Where will participants in mobile crowdsourcing markets be willing to go to complete tasks? The answer is not very far, right? In fact, they had, when they analyzed this using their statistics, they found out that the furthest away the task was, the least willing the person would be to take and to develop the task, which is, I mean, just what we could expect, right? We wouldn't expect people to say we want to take the tasks that are furthest away, except if they paid us the air ticket, right? I wouldn't mind going to New York to take a picture of a tree or even a traffic sign, right? Just pay me the air tickets, and I will even pay my hotel for the weekends, right? And have a weekend in the city, just to do that, right? And then okay, here, of course, as the authors are using statistical methods, they can't avoid thinking of a hypothesis. So they have a hypothesis. Hypothesis is an idea, is what you believe that will happen. And in this case, they think that the distance to the as the distance to the task increases, willingness to complete the task will decrease. And in fact, they have two hypotheses here. And as the socioeconomic status of the task surroundings increases, willingness to complete a task will increase. In this case, and this is exactly what they found, right? That places where people were socioeconomically, let's say, better fit, they were more willing to take part in this kind of project. And then with respect to price, they also had a question that turned into a hypothesis here, and those are the hypotheses that they tested a little further in the paper. I found interesting this table where they thought of 3 tasks, and I said two of them that I used as examples before. They're taking a picture of the leaf and bark of a tree, and then taking a picture of signs at an intersection. Right? They say that the level of engagement is taking a picture of a leaf is higher. And it's basically because for some reason we like nature more than we like concrete. Okay? And then the third question here shows a situation in which engagement would be even higher, which in this case is or the engagement level required is higher, is visiting someone's home and asking the owners to respond to a single question about local politics. Notice, you have to have interaction with a person. This task is much more demanding than the previous ones, right? And therefore, if it needs to be done if you were completely aligned, for example, if you were part of the party, and if you were really an enthusiastic part of the party, you could say that you would do that for love, right? But if you're a completely a person that is not interested at all in politics, doing that involves that kind of, the task becomes more complex, as Teodoro would say, because it involves knocking at someone's door, having to talk to people. We're not used to that any longer. You know, like in the past, maybe it was something that people like to do. Now we like to talk to machines, right? If it was to talk to an automated machine, it would be a much easier task than having to talk to someone that you don't know, right? You don't know how people will react, and so there's some complexity there. Here he's talking again about the Pareto thing. The median respondents performed a task on TaskRabbit between once a week and once every 2 weeks. 30% of the respondents indicated that they complete multiple tasks per week. So 30%, it's a little more than Pareto. Pareto was usually, we say 20%, right? But anyway, 30% are the power users here. The ones that if you tell them about a task, if they can fit in their daily schedule, they will perform it, right? So those are the ones that actually mean business for a company like TaskRabbit. Okay, then the research question, talking about the research question about willingness to participate. These are the results here. In fact, notice that there is a negative correlation between the time the time that you need to get to the place and the intention, the willingness to take the task. So this is negative. Notice, I don't know if all of you are familiar with statistics, but basically the p-value is the chance of being wrong, right? And maybe a statistician wouldn't like very much my way of explaining this, but what I'm saying is when you have a p-value that is below 5%, you say, yes, I can take that with a little risk of being wrong. I will assume that as being true, right? So what we're saying here is that as the p-value is very low, we can definitely assume the risk of saying that the furthest away the task is, the least attractive it becomes to people. On the other hand, when we talk about the SES, the socioeconomic status of the area, notice that there's a positive relationship here to the willingness, which means that if you're in an area of the city that is socioeconomically more or better, let's say, there is this intention of doing the task will be higher because there are more possibly because there are more people willing to perform the task there. And then the other table here talks about the price expected for you to do it, and there is also a positive in this case there is a positive correlation between distance and price. The furthest away the task is, the more money or you will be willing to receive. So nothing here that could make us find it unexpected, but it's good when we find evidence that even support something that you would already think that would happen in a specific way. What else? And then I found interesting the implications for ride sharing, which appears there and close to the end of the paper. Because in fact, what they're calling ride sharing here is almost like microtasks, the physical microtasks that they are calling here mobile crowdsourcing markets. Right? I would, for me, Uber, for example, is definitely part of a mobile crowdsourcing market, right? But I'm not so sure if it's part of sharing economy, at least not if we want to be a little stricter with respect to what we call sharing economy. Right? And then, you had already said it is expensive to be poor if you live in an area, in a rural area, or in this case here in the south side of Chicago that are poorer areas. You will find that people will only perform tasks there for you for a higher price, and they will be less willing to perform tasks there as well, even for security reasons, maybe the same reason that you appointed for Uber not to visit the place where you live. Okay, I think for this paper, that's it. I don't know if you have any comments about this paper or the previous one. They're sort of related one to the other. I think they discuss, although their objectives are different, they discuss issues that are not only close, but that at least show some alignment. They're going the same direction. All right, and then what is this? No. Here. And then our last paper. In fact, I'm saying it's the last paper because I also had one here on which is not here any longer. I don't know where I put it. On Wikipedia. Oh, it's here. What motivates Wikipedians? But for some reason, when I was trying to put it on here this morning, I noticed that the link is not working. So the link was broken to you. Nobody complained, so I guess you haven't read it. So we're not going to discuss it. But anyway, I'll try to find the link for that paper as well. Okay, it's.
It was easy to find.
Yeah, I guess it was not. Maybe the ones of you who tried. I don't know what happened to my. So how many of you were able to read what motivates Wikipedia?
I received
Oh,
from the author.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. You sent him a message and he sent it to you. Wow. Oh, this is even. See, this is not as easy as looking for it on. But anyway, you can already. Maybe we should have. Have you had an interview with him, asking him what the parts that he liked the paper the most and everything, and then. But anyway, that's so that would be our last paper. I have also a problem. The one that we're talking about is what motivates Wikipedians. The problem that I have is that I myself will have a problem right now to show it here. So we'll probably leave it aside. Let's just focus on why users of Yahoo Answer do not answer questions. You may ask, well, we're getting to a lot of detail here. Who cares? I'm not a Yahoo user. Who cares about what makes people answer questions at Yahoo? And say, well, remember, they're part of our crowds. We have to understand the crowds to see what will motivate them to participate in our own collective intelligence projects, right? So we're not too concerned about Yahoo Answers. Although it is an interesting project because, I mean, you get people from all over the world to answer whatever question you pose there, right? And you get some interesting answers there as well. But anyway, for those of you who have never used Yahoo Answers, I will say we're not interested in Yahoo Answers. We are interested in what motivates Yahoo people who answer questions that others pose in that platform, because we think that they could be people that we could engage in our own projects. Well, abstract. Do we have an objective?
Here again, it's not stated our objective is the aim of our study. It's not stated.
It's not stated easily. In fact, the first time I saw what could be the objective here, I wrote, this is a justification. You know, it's over here. Well, notice the beginning here is sort of a context. Posing a question to an online question and answer community does not guarantee a response. This is completely irrelevant for at least for the abstract. But anyway, their context, even they had a few lines, you know, like where was this published? This was published in, it's a conference. They had given a few more lines and they said, well, there's no problem in contextualizing a little further. So that's what they did. Significant prior work has explored and identified members' motivations for contributing to communities of collective action. For example, Yahoo Answers. In contrast, it's not well understood why members choose to not answer a question they already have read. So this exactly. This is I would say that this is the objective is here. Notice, because they say to explore this issue. So if that's an issue is a problem that I want to solve. So the objective is understanding why someone who is an answerer, right, who's a volunteer to answer questions, reads the questions and says, I'm not going to answer this one. Right? Mainly if we have a project that we want to have answers for all questions, what is wrong there? What do these people need either to motivate them to still answer, or what is the problem with the question itself? In fact, they found out here that in many cases, or in some cases, there was a problem with the question or a fear that the answer that one could give could be misinterpreted. They said questions that were more sensitive, for example, questions that involved delicate issues for a society or for a group were questions that were avoided by people who tended to answer other questions much more frequently or much more naturally, because there was a risk of being misinterpreted, or even of being right interpreted, but still there was a risk of the person who asked the question not enjoying the answer and push the button, ban this guy. Remember that our social networks today, we can kill someone very quickly. It's just pressing a button. And if someone is involved in a project, the only thing that they don't want is someone telling that they are persona non grata, that they shouldn't be there, right? But anyway, so the results are shown here. So I agree, Marco, not very clearly stated. There is a hint here, and mainly if this statement was not here to explore this issue, we would find that whatever was written above here was just a justification for the work, but we would still be willing to know, but what is the purpose of this work?
You just say something in the last three lines, we discuss something more.
Yeah, but this,
It's not
what they say in the last three lines, it's actually implications for future. It's actually future work or mainly implications of the results, right? They're saying, you know, based on the findings that based on the findings we have, we can let's say based on the what is it? Informed by our results, we discuss opportunities to improve the efficacy of the questions and answers process and to encourage greater contribution through improved design. So what they're saying here is they found out what the problems were, and based on that they can help people. Maybe Yahoo Answers itself could instruct people when writing questions. Look, write your questions this or that way, because this will improve the chances that you get good answers, right? All right, so, but anyway, they have the content. Do they have a method? Yes, they explore, what do they say? We surveyed 135 active members of Yahoo Answers. Surveyed, here we understand that, yeah, this is not an interview, this is a questionnaire. Usually a survey is a questionnaire. Okay, here are the first paragraphs, the second side of the page here. They show a few of the motivations that already appear in the literature, involving altruism, reciprocity, reputation building, sense of efficacy, a personal or community need for information, and so on and so forth. And then here a few more: altruism, belonging, collaboration, egoism, different things, right? Egoism is selfishness. Egotism is, look how beautiful I am, right? Emotional support, empathy, knowledge, power, reputation, self-esteem, self-expression, and wisdom. These are all things that appeared in the literature before. Then we have here their questions. We have here the main results. Notice another paper here that presents the results already in the introduction, which means that this is not so unusual. I personally don't like. I personally prefer to show the results much later on in the paper, because I think this is an anticlimax. You get here, you tell everything, and then people, okay, I'll be reading the rest of the paper just for the sake of reading it, or just to see if there's no surprise in the middle of the way. And then there's there's the methods right after. So the method is what were the procedures that they took to get to the results, and then here we have the results, main results. One interesting thing: no observable difference in the responses from the top and regular contributors. Okay, that was they noticed that so if they did the Pareto thing, and there are people that respond a lot, and there are other people that respond less, right? So and they noticed that the reasons why they avoided contributing, or that they didn't contribute, were all the same, which means that this is probably they're consistent reasons regardless of the characteristics of whoever is responding. Another curious thing here is that they had, I think they had many more responses from the top respondents than from other respondents, right? But that's also expectable, because if they already respond all the questions that people pose at Yahoo answers, that means that they like answering questions. So it doesn't surprise me. But
They think it's relevant.
pardon?
They think it's relevant.
They think it's relevant. But not, you know, one of the things that for me was very interesting here was, and I think it is shown here in the next page, when they remark here that one of the problems was that participants indicated that they do not respond to a question if they are unsure how the answer will be received and interpreted by the asker. Well, I don't know how often you answer surveys for, you know, students working on their theses or dissertations. I try to do that, although I find that I have very little time and I should be doing other things. I always try to answer. But many times I stop in the middle. You know why? Because the survey was poorly conceived, and then I have exactly this feeling. It's not that I think that they will not interpret me well, but it's mainly that the way they are asking me, they will not know what my reason for answering one thing or another was. And I say, this is going to be, it's garbage in, it's going to be garbage out, right? It's very important that when we think of surveys, we write the best questions we can, so that the answer doesn't stop in the middle only because they think, look, this is not going to take this person anywhere. I don't want to give them rubbish for them to work on, spend a whole year dealing with statistics to find something, and of course they will find, because we always, with statistics, we torture our data until it tells us some truth, right? It's statistics, and the police use exactly the same methods, right? They, mainly if you are in the social, the SES part of the socioeconomically lower, but anyway, you know, their questionnaires, it keeps going, and at the beginning you think, well, it's interesting, and then you get to a point that you say, look, I'm not going to spend, first they told me that I was going to spend 15 minutes. I've already spent half an hour. So I already feel that I was cheated. And now I notice that, you know, the 15 minutes that I spent, it was for nothing, because the questionnaire is wrong, is bad. So they're saying here, ask good questions if you want to have good answers. Of course, if we were talking about the motivations of the answerers, that is the crowds, this advice here is not for them, right? This advice is for whoever wants to get the crowds to support them with answers to their questions. Another issue here was that in some situations, respondents are unable and for the most part unwilling to answer a question when they do not know the answer or are not qualified to answer. Very good. That it would be good if that always happened. I don't have the same impression. Many times I've seen these forums, well, not the forums that you take part in here, and not the collective intelligence forums, but when you see discussions on the web, I have the feeling that there is many times a lot of people who do not know what they're talking about and still willing to participate. It's impressive how important the social aspect is. You know, like, they're not concerned with the fact that they're talking nonsense. but they want to be engaged, right?
After reading this paper, I checked on Yahoo Answers, and there was a question about math. Then just a guy, I don't know the answer. I'm not good at math. Just to.
Yeah. Okay. So someone has a mathematics question, and someone who doesn't have an answer goes there and answers, and that will, of course. Look at look. You have an answer there. Then you're going to go there and you see this. Come on. We have to know that if we don't know, we don't know.
And that's very common in Brazilian Yahoo answers. I don't know if it's different in DC.
It may be cultural. I agree.
Because Yahoo answers is mostly in Brazil is garbage.
Mhm.
You
can't
ask
use it
for
for
serious questions.
Right.
There are many questions like I don't know.
So yeah, so if you don't know, we don't want to, the question is there to be for someone who knows to answer. It may be cultural. I always find really risky to ask for example, when I'm lost somewhere and I have to ask someone how to get to a place. Brazilians will always give you an answer. That's a problem, you know. See, Marco, don't ask people at the street or ask, but be aware. You will get an answer. The problem is check it a little later because yeah, they want to be nice to you. You know, it's not that they're going to say, well, let me see this bloody Italian here. I'm going to send him to the other side of the city. It's not that, but they don't want to tell you that they don't know, so they take a guess, right? If it's you who are going to walk anyway. It's not them, so they take a guess. Keep going, right? But you better check next a block later, ask again, and then you start averaging the wisdom of the crowds, because and then maybe you have a I don't know if that happens in other places. I've lived in Germany, and in Germany, if the guy says, I don't know, he will say, I don't know. And he may even bark at you, I don't know, right? But you get the answer. Here, no, people will be very nice to you, but you will not get the answer. An issue about the syntax. So the syntax of a question is important. Right? It has to be understandable. And in fact, even, I don't want to say that we should be how do I say that in English? Manipulative in the way we ask. But depending on the way you ask, people will answer. Depending on the way you ask, people will hate you and not answer, or will answer you, but only with bad words or whatever. So you have to think of the best way. So when they're talking here about syntax, I think it goes much further than that. There is, first, of course, you have to be understood, but in addition to that, for example, if you're talking, I think there are ways in which you can ask about those sensitive issues that people are afraid of talking about, but you have to ask about. There are things that are taboo, and we don't even know why they're like that. For example, in Brazil, you don't ask someone in a survey or anywhere how much money the person makes, right? Asking their salary is an insult, and you will get no. In this case, you'll get no answer, right? They'll turn back and go. But if you ask them for a category, let's say, is your earnings from 0 to 1,000, from 1,000 to 2,000, whatever? That makes answer a little easier for them. It's cultural. I don't know why we're so ashamed of. I don't know if we're ashamed because we think that we get more money than we should, or the opposite. We're ashamed of getting so little money for what we do. But the fact is, people don't talk about their salary. So if you need that information, you have to find other ways of getting to it. You could even ask them how many bathrooms they have in the house. They will tell you, right? And then you can know how much money they make, right? At least it's a proxy. What else? Look at this this is really interesting. Respondents want to be recognized. Glory is important. Are you going to answer a question where 50 other people have already answered? You'll probably say, let me spend my time answering another question where my answer is going to be seen, and people will even give me a like, say, yes, I like that answer. If my answer is going to be left there in the middle of 1,000 others, I say I will not even bother. Right? But we already know the reason for that, right? People, they're answering, but they want their answer to be seen, not to be forgotten. And then let's go straight to the conclusions here. One thing that I caught my attention here was here when they say that the nature and the composition of the question is important. Their perception of how the asker will receive and interpret their response, and the belief that their response will simply get lost in the crowd if there have been too many responses already. Those are the issues that appear here. Oh, it's a very simple, very naive paper to some extent, but again, it brings us some perspective of again, of motivations. You will see that all papers that you read from the ones that we assigned for this course, all of them will at some stage or another talk about motivation. Because mainly in those cases that we are trying to drive away from paying people the way they're used to be in our traditional economic world, we have to be, we'll have to involve them, and involving them will depend on creative ways of showing them how our objectives could be aligned to their objectives, and showing them that the effort that they will have to put in is much lower than the benefits that they will have directly or that others could have from their work, and so on and so forth. Okay. Right, so I think it's it. Actually, for me, this has been a marathon, almost 4 hours talking. I hope that you're not too bored, but anyway, we needed this for, I think it was just too slow in the first half, but anyway. Pardon? Yes, I will post the form so that you can write over the holiday. And remember, for those who, mainly the undergraduate students who have no classes next week for the other courses, we will have classes here, right? Our class is exactly like normal. In fact, the university will be a little quieter because there will only be graduate students and, of course, those in this class, but we will be around. Okay, so see you next week.